Yes, welcome in YouTube friends, and make sure to hit like and subscribe while you're here. We're going to take a look at potential World Cup opponents Wales and the Sounders making their first ever Concacaf Champions League final on today's show. So let's get after it. Yes, welcome everybody to another exciting installment of In Soccer We Trust with your three favorite former U.S. men's national team players, Jimmy Conrad, that's myself, Charlie, Chuck Wagon Davies, and Hollywood Heath Pearce. And we have a big show for you two guys to get. I can't even speak English right now, but I'm having a great time because it's the In Soccer We Trust podcast. We appreciate you guys. Hit like and subscribe, turn on your notifications on the YouTubes, hit all the good stuff on the podcast platforms as well. Leave us a review if you're feeling up to it. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't. Hopefully you can speak better English or type it better than I can speak it. Charlie, I'm coming to you. And then Heath, you're going to go next. But Charlie, I'm coming to you first. You are got the rich mahogany behind you.
Yes.
Great to see you as always, my friend. And I'm excited to break down Wales with you. Obviously, talk about the excitement of the Sounders making the Concacaf Champions League final. But let's talk about you. Let's get a temperature on Charlie Davies. What's going on with you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to. You have World Cup ahead in November, and I think the Nations League, I'm really pumped about the friendlies leading up to the Nations League games. Concacaf Champions League, I think we're finally going to have a winner from Major League Soccer in the Seattle Sounders. Man, there's a lot to look forward to. So this is a big year.
That's a big year. Obviously, another fun episode that we get to do with both of you guys and with our great community that continues to grow. We appreciate everybody's support. Hit us up on Twitter as well, ISWT Pod on the Twitter. Heath, I'm coming to you. It looks like one of the options for us to play in a friendly is Uruguay. I know we touched upon it before, but with Darwin Nunez absolutely lighting it up for Benfica, I'm a little bit nervous for that game. Maybe it's a good run out for our center backs with Cavani and Suarez and now Nunez. What say you just about anything, Heath?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that what we want? I mean, they need some challenges. I need everybody in the best form of their life to play against our national team. So either we get like a little humble pie or we're forced to just adapt to these things. But it's interesting, the Sounders, because I think Charlie was pro NYCFC, and now it's the Pumas team that took his revs down after a big lead that they're going to play against, which is kind of crazy. I just, I don't know if Charlie remembers.
Are you trying to say that every team that Charlie backs, they lose?
Well, I just don't remember him. I don't remember him backing the Sounders on this one. But, we're here. We're here. We're all here.
I think I've always backed the Sounders. Just going to throw that out there.
That's fair. I'm excited to see how that game goes as well. That'll be happening next Tuesday night on FS1, Fox Sports. So just so everybody can circle it on their calendars. But before we get into that, let's talk about one of our potential opponents in the World Cup, and that is Wales. Now, to catch everybody up, they were in Group E in European World Cup qualifying. They were in with Belgium, Czech Republic, Estonia, and Belarus. And Belgium won. They had 6 wins and 2 draws, Belgium, and clinched the automatic spot. Wales got second. They had to get a draw against Czech Republic in that last game to secure that second place spot. They did that. They only lost once through qualifying. 4 wins, 3 draws, 1 loss, plus 5 goal difference. Pretty impressive, all things considered. Wales have not qualified for a World Cup since 1958. So we're talking about guys like Ian Rush, Ryan Giggs, never ever representing their country in a World Cup. So this would be a big deal for this Welsh team that boasts Gareth Bale, amongst others. They went into the playoff and they played Austria first. They won 2-1 there. Gareth Bale scored 2 excellent world-class goals to make that happen. And now they're awaiting who is going to win between Scotland and Ukraine. And those dates had just been determined that Scotland and Ukraine will be playing at Hampton Park, where I played once against Scotland back in the day. I don't know, Heath, if you were there or not. And it was a 1-1 draw, and DeMarcus Beasley scored.
That was my debut.
Was it?
Yeah, 2005?
2005, that's correct. Yeah, nice. And
glad you remember my debut, Jimmy.
Well, you know what? It's a big blur, ultimately, all things considered. But that's what
it was a blur. Debuts are a blur anyway. I was a blur for me. I was just out. I played 17 minutes. It was the most exhausted I ever was in my life. I realized that.
I feel like, did we go in at the same time? Because I went in around for like 20 minutes as well. I feel like you and I came in. I should know that.
I went in for Beasley. In that game, I think somewhere like all I know is that it was the longest 17 minutes of my life. I didn't enjoy it at all. It wasn't like one of those like the things where you see they make movies about where it's like everything goes into slow motion. It went into full speed, fast motion against Scotland. The ball was bouncing back and forth for 20 minutes. I was out of breath from the very start, and I was like, well, I guess that's international football. I guess that's just really what it is.
I just remember Darren Fletcher in that game had a pass. I thought I had blocked his passing lane. I thought I blocked everything, and he still put it on the opposite foot away from me with like the perfect weight. And I'm like, God damn, I understand why this guy plays at Manchester United. But anyway, that's what the game's going to be happening between Scotland and Ukraine June 1st. And the winner of that will take on Wales on June 5th in Wales. So Wales will get to host this game. I feel like Wales are the favorite here. Charlie, I'll come to you first again. Do they scare you at all if they end up getting into our group? We're going to play them first, so it's obviously an important game. We need to get the full 3 points. Are they the team you'd want to face out of these three, or the least you'd want to face? So give me some insight on what you're thinking about with regard to Wales.
I'm definitely not scared. When I look at Wales or Scotland or Ukraine, for that matter, there's nothing that scares me. I think if you're looking for game changers, Wales has Gareth Bale. And that's kind of the unknown, because when Gareth Bale is motivated and enjoying playing the game, he's a problem. And he can create from anything, a moment from shooting 30 to 40 yards out to a set piece to, a counterattack. He's a beast. And there it is. Rafa Cardenas. Exactly. He's a beast. So he could be a problem. Other than that, defensively, I don't think Wales can deal with us when we're at our best. So ultimately, if we play our game, like you always talked about, Heath, when we would play teams, we didn't really have to focus on what they do well. Of course, we know Gareth Bale, what he can do, even Aaron Ramsey when he's on and what he can do. Daniel James, we've seen him in the Premiership, what he can do and his pace and kind of just his running off the ball. But if we focus on how we play and we win the second balls and the transitions on point and we finish our chances, we beat Wales.
Yeah, I mean, they do have Daniel James, which I think is a pretty big threat. They do have Harry Wilson, which I think is a pretty big threat.
Aaron Ramsey.
They got Rambo. I mean, again, don't know what Rambo you're going to get.
Joe Allen, he's the Welsh Xavi.
Yeah, you don't know. You don't know what you're going to get from Gareth Bale. But they've got enough quality to be in the position that they're in now. They obviously can arrive on their day. I think these smaller nations are difficult because they come together. It tends to be a smaller. I don't want to call it a smaller nation, but the player pool is going to be a little bit more, I guess, smaller and more compact. They're going to play more games together over time, considering it's going to be a smaller elite player pool. I'm not saying that comparing to the US, but I'm saying just in terms of how this team has developed. So it's not an ideal one. They can have their day, but I do like, again, the way the US matches up against a Wales side.
Well, I'll jump in and say, if you look back at their Euros that happened just last summer, because of the pandemic, they drew with Switzerland 1-1, and Switzerland had a pretty good Euros that all things considered there. Turkey, they beat Turkey 2-0. Turkey really disappointing. And then they ended up losing to Italy 1-0, got a red card in that game. They qualified for the round of 16 and lost to Denmark 4-0. And if I'm Greg Berhalter and the staff, I would really look at that game in particular to kind of showcase how you can break them down despite when they have all these weapons. Obviously, Gareth Bale is going to be the focal point. And if they do end up qualifying for the World Cup, because it's the first time they've done it in so many years, they're going to be so amped up and ready to go for that first game in particular. Nothing will be settled. Everything is up for grabs. The hope will be there. And that makes me a little bit nervous. And I think, to Charlie's point, a motivated Gareth Bale is a very scary proposition. But they also have some vulnerabilities as well. When I look at their back line, let's look at the game they played against Austria with the one that playoff they had to get him in this spot. They have Ben Davies, plays for Spurs. Joe Rodon hasn't really done all that much. Ampadu is another player in their back line.
I've seen him exposed countless times in Serie A.
For sure, 100%. I mean, they have players that we can get after.
Yeah, let's not give Ampadu the Ampadu that we knew 5 years ago, right? Like he's at Venezia now. He's not like it's not the Ampadu of like, could he be the next something, right? We've sort of seen a little bit more of him to know that this isn't. At least in my mind, I associate him with the early days of like high potential, and I don't think he's become what or will become what we thought he could.
Yeah, I mean, and Joe Rodon, I don't know how to say it. He plays for Spurs and never really panned out, but they have players that we can take advantage of. But it gets us back to our number 9 conversation, because our number 9 could really get after it. And I kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts just based on the performance that Jesus Ferreira had this past weekend for FC Dallas, where maybe it was a great thing for Jesus Ferreira that Ricardo Pepi moved on to Augsburg, because it allowed him to move into that position and be more of a focal point and not necessarily be the supplier to Ricardo Pepi. He gets to be on the end of a lot of stuff. And he scored 2 very good goals and really well taken goals. what are we saying, Heath? I'll come back to you about Jesus Ferreira, and then I want to hear from Charlie, the proper number 9 in this conversation, about Jesus Ferreira and his impact with FC Dallas and how important it is for him to maybe really push on. I think he's embracing the number 9 role. Like, if I'm going to get on the team and actually get significant minutes with this national team, it's as the number 9. That's as wide open a spot as any we have on the roster.
Yeah, I continue to look at Ricardo Pepi as like somebody who has the most tools as a 9, but if he's not in form, then he shouldn't play. And when I look at Ferreira, I think about a guy who's really in form. To me, it's like I've got to rewire the whole way in which we attack if Jesus Ferreira, or the way in which I think we could potentially attack with Ricardo Pepi versus Jesus Ferreira. I think Jesus Ferreira, if we adapt to the fact that he's on the field and we start to get all those attackers again more connected on the field, and they're more kind of, I guess the word is connected, just in terms of their interconnected play, combination play, those types of things. I think he can be really, really strong. But I still think we've always been at our best of like ball in, ball back, get down to the touchlines with the ball in. But I think we still got more quality in that. Maybe Jesus Ferreira can bring that out if we can have some more of that combination play between the attacking 4 or 5 players, because he's in fantastic form right now, and definitely the hot hand, and one that I would go with, and one that I think Greg not surprisingly now, but even when he was given his shots, people didn't know where it came from. He came off last year, was kind of an average year for Jesus Ferreira. The year before that, he was sort of the Ricardo Pepi of that season. And now we're seeing him sort of coming to life with a brand new contract, big money, and delivering on that. He certainly got the makings of, maybe I'm just holding him to a different standard, but he certainly got the makings of being a number 9. If we're willing to change a little bit of the way in which we play to get him more involved and sort of play to his strengths around him.
I like the way that Jesus Ferreira is playing and approaching this race, because it is a race in the sense of whoever is the most in form, Greg Berhalter is going to call in. And he's already talked about the striker position is a little different than any other position on the field. When you go into a World Cup, you want the hottest striker, the striker that brings you your team has the chance to bring you the most success. And so you're weighing who's done well for you in the build-up to the World Cup versus who is performing at the moment. If a striker is low in confidence and not playing regularly, it's really tough to get them going in the World Cup. Even if the excitement's there and the motivation's there, if the confidence is low, because all it takes is one squandered opportunity and they can't get themselves out, because that's where they've been, as opposed to a striker who's feeling himself. And if Wales plays a 3-5-2, that kind of makes it a little bit easier for a striker who likes to check and find those little gaps, like a Jesus Ferreira, for this team to have success. So in a 3-5-2, when I'm looking at Wales lineup, and you have Connor Roberts as the right wing back, and Neco Williams is the left wing back, and Ben Davies and Ampadu are the 2 outside center backs in the 3-back system, that speaks to me like, hey, let's go for Christian Pulisic. Let's go for Gio Reyna. Those are the type of areas that they're going to operate in, and you love your chances if you have a 1v1, or Ampadu or Ben Davies gets pulled out of space. There's going to be nice little pockets for those outside wingers to make runs into. Yeah,
that was my next question. I'm glad you brought that up, the 3-5-2 in particular. That's what they played against Austria. In the game before that, against Belgium, they ended up in a 5-4-1. And obviously that's a team
that's just to defend.
Right. That's just to defend. And against the Belgium team, they're trying, I guess, to minimize the type of possession Belgium's going to get. But against Austria, they had to go for it, Heath. And so to Charlie's point, I actually think our wingers could take full advantage of this now. Connor Roberts plays for Burnley, and Neco Williams plays for Fulham on loan from Liverpool. So obviously some talented guys, got plenty of experience. But I'd take Christian Pulisic and Gio Reyna over those two any day of the week. How important do you think it is for our wingers to... Well, I mean, it's I don't want to state the Captain Obvious stuff here, but do you think that's the area of the field where we can have the most success, or do you feel like it's our wingbacks with maybe a Serginho Dest and Anthony Robinson that could end up providing the difference? I'm kind of curious. Also, do you think Wales will come out and be more aggressive against us as opposed to playing against an England where they might drop into a 5-4-1?
I don't know. I think that they're going to look at us and say we don't have a number 9 still. I mean, maybe we will at that point, but if the game was today, you'd look at it and you've got all of these disciplined Premier League or Championship defenders that are totally comfortable forcing the ball wide and sitting into the box and just clearing the lines every time. I think that plays right into their hand. And that's where I think we need to be a little more clever in our play in through the middle, to be able to break down lines, to be able to pull players in and out of positions. I think we still really struggle with that. So if you're Wales, I don't see them necessarily sitting back in the way they would England trying to survive, but I do see them sitting back as a tactical, as a way, not in a defensive way, but in an attacking way, to just say, okay, like, just frustrate them. They're not going to break through this. We're going to get our chances. We'll build up. We'll break out on the counter. We'll get our chances to build up too, through passing and breaking the US's lines when they're unorganized, or changing the point of attack. But at a minimum, if we just stay disciplined, the US doesn't have a whole lot against us. Yeah, let Pulisic go one-on-one on the wings. Okay, push him wide, push him to the wide side.
We also have to get him the ball in those spots too, which is another part of the equation.
And so I think you sit back against the US if I know we're spilling all the secrets of the US weaknesses, which no one would know about if it wasn't for us. But it's certainly a good tactic to play against the US right now, and really force us to have to be clever. And I hope all the opponents leading up, by the way, do that same thing. So we're forced to just take chances in lower risk environments to try to find that rhythm to break teams down in a different way.
No, that's a good answer. And it's a nice segue into the question I have for Charlie, which is spurred on by Valentina in the chat. She's been an OG supporter from the very beginning, so we appreciate you, Valentina. She basically, month. Well, we've been around for that. U.S. men's national team hour was the precursor. She's been around for that as well. But I do want to say respect. Hashtag respect. Valentina makes a good thought about, should we just have a number 9 that we're going to just pick now and then stick with that person so we can build that rapport and build that trust? Yeah, we did try that, but now we're getting to a point where it's getting closer to crunch time.
Unfortunately,
we've seen in the past. Okay, 2010, we've seen in the past that we didn't really have an answer there, and we brought a whole bunch of people. We brought Hercules Gomez, Edson Buttle, Robbie Finley, just going with the hot hand at that point. I remember in my World Cup, we had Brian Ching and Taylor Twellman both scoring a bunch of goals, and only Brian Ching ended up coming, because I think he's Landon's best friend. I don't know if Landon liked Taylor. Different conversation for another time.
But after that, it was Josie.
It was Josie after that, right? Right, and that felt a little bit more locked in.
It should have been Chuck.
It should have been Chuck.
Chuck had it on luck. He had that on luck. You remember what he said in the last episode? We had to bring like 7 extra strikers because he didn't go.
That's true. So Charlie, having been through this experience and obviously seen other iterations of World Cup qualifying and different rosters when you were younger and now a little bit older, what do you think about Valentina's point about, do we need to just lock in on one number 9 now? And even though Heath had correctly mentioned we'd already tried that and hasn't necessarily worked, or do you feel like it's still wide open and won't get decided until a couple weeks before the tournament starts?
Well, I think in a scenario where you have a striker who's always creating chances and you know what you're going to get from them, even if they're not confident and they're in a rut, then that's a whole different proposition, because you say, hey, we have a striker who's going to open up space for everyone, who's always going to be a constant threat, who's going to get shots off. Maybe they're not scoring, but we know they're going to cause problems. And he's going to be, because he sets the line, he really dictates the tempo, especially on the press. So you go with that. The problem is, right now, currently, all of our strikers in the pool are not proven on the international level yet. They haven't been consistent, and they sure as hell haven't been consistent with their presence and their threat. So you could watch a striker in some games and they're invisible. You can't stick with a player who goes in and out of games. You have to have a 9 who's been there, done that, holding up the ball. And whether it's scoring goals or holding up the ball or making runs, or they're always a constant threat and a nuisance to the other opposing team. We haven't had that yet. So you can't say, I'm going to alienate the rest of my pool and stick with Jesus Ferreira or Ricardo Pepi if all these other players come into the fold and they start scoring goals, and you're going to say, I can't throw you in. No, now's the time to do that, to kind of push everybody and say, hey, whoever's playing up here, this is the way we got to play. If you look at France in the 2018 World Cup, which I think is a great point, they had a number of players playing. Anthony Martial, Lacazette, players who have been scoring goals.
Right.
They stuck with Giroud because whether he was scoring or not, and he didn't in that World Cup, they were going to play off of him the way he played, and it was always consistent. He was gonna use his body, hold up the ball, and bring the other attacking players into play. You could live with that. You knew you were gonna have success. We don't have that player yet.
I almost want to go off and do a tangent and whether you think Benzema is a better fit for France than Giroud, given that Giroud is a little bit more consistent in how he brings in other players. But we'll leave that for another time because that's a big question. So Ace of them spades, what's up? Thank you for the comment. Says, what if we just go with the most informed striker when November comes? And I think the answer to that is, yeah, you probably have to, because we haven't seen anybody step up and really own it. Now, there's plenty of time for that to change. We could see if Augsburg stays up in the Bundesliga, then with a proper summer, proper offseason, Ricardo Pepi steps in and is the guy for Augsburg, then that's going to answer that question. But I don't know, Heath, what do you say to just kind of waiting to the last minute and going with whoever's hot? And I want to give everybody some context that in a couple windows, we started a different striker in every single game. And I feel like, as much as that's kind of cool, and also a little bit scary that we haven't got that part of the field or that number 9 locked up yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is detrimental to the development of our attack, not having a consistent person that we know. Like, from our generation, you knew how to play with Josie differently than you knew how to play with Brian Ching,
or
different than Eddie Johnson, and kind of where the rhythm was going to come from, where the attack was going to come from, where they wanted those balls, whether they want them underneath, whether they want in behind, whether they're going to check and go, and the way in which the attacking 4 or 5 again can sort of build a rhythm together and a trust together as where's the next pass. Now, part of that is personnel, and part of that is the tactics and the way in which they play. And that's national team's different than a club team, where you can run patterns all day long to find your build up and things like that. It's a little more fluid on the national team. Yes, you do some of that, but what is it, like 2? I think we have like 10 days or something until the first match when we go into that final camp, or like the pre-World Cup camp is less than 2 weeks. I think it is something like that.
Yeah, which feels a little. I mean, everybody has to suffer through it, so we're not isolated to us, but it feels a little unfair that you only have that much time to build chemistry. To Brett's point here, we have 4 games in June and 2 in September, and that's it. We should be working towards building chemistry instead of just kind of rolling the dice and going with whoever's hot. But I feel like to Brett's point, I think 10 of the players, 9 or 10 of the players will be decided. I think it's really just the number 9 that might be the one that we're rolling the dice and going with whoever's feeling good about themselves. Yeah. Heath, you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I want Charlie's take on this mostly because when I think about the 2 strikers now, I think about Ferreira and Pepi, right? Two very different places in terms of form, but also 2 very different types of strikers. And you can see, if those are the 2 strikers, why you're rotating them through games, because it's based on the matchup, based on the moments, based on what you need. But I'm left sort of thinking, same as you, Jimmy, what you just said, of like, is it good to be rotating these guys in every match? Is it based on the matchup? I mean, I don't know, Charlie. I mean, what's your take on when you use Ferreira versus when you use Pepi in these games, and how does one of them become the starter if like what is their role to become the sure starter in this national team? What do they have to do?
I think when you're looking at who's going to be leading the line in the World Cup, there's a couple of factors. So you look at these friendlies in the Nations League games to go with your most informed striker and see how they perform in these games. It could be really simple and easy. Jesus Ferreira gets the start. He's crushing MLS. He comes in, he delivers in the friendlies, because they're going to be playing top quality opponents. So the competition is real. If he does well, then that's going to be a little bit of a reflection of the World Cup and playing to that level. So then you're going to ride into the summer, late summer, and then fall. Come November, if Jesus Ferreira is still doing what he's doing, he's going to be your starting striker. And that's what they're going to live by. Now, if it's still up and down and he goes out of form, maybe he gets injured, Ricardo Pepi comes on, I think it's going to come down to who's performing really well, and whoever Greg decides to go with, that's your striker for the rest of the tournament. There is no flipping, flopping.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Jimmy, you feel differently?
I think whoever you play has to be able to play in every single type of match, because they're going to obviously lead the press. They're going to dictate how, if you're going to be running into channels, if you're going to hold up the ball. You rely on that person, regardless if you're going to be aggressive or a little bit, I'd say, maybe more of a defensive play. If you're playing against England, you're not going to switch up your strikers. I think that's with one.
I feel like we just seen a trend under Greg Burrow. I'm looking at. I agree with you in theory that we should stick with the same guy and let that person be the person we're building around and building that rapport. And I always lean back into the 2014 World Cup, which sounds like a long time ago. It's actually the last time we played in the World Cup, which makes me sad, tear. But we had Kyle Beckerman playing CD. I'm going to use him as an example. We had Kyle Beckerman playing CDM in the 3 group stage games. And then we switched out and brought in Jeff Cameron against Belgium, and we gave up more shots on goal than I think any other team in World Cup history. And I really think it was that change because the center backs were used to one CDM, playing a certain way, supporting the play in a certain way, blocking passing lanes in a certain way. And whatever you think about Kyle Beckerman, there was a nice rapport built between the center backs and the holding midfield.
Well, that's why he played, because he was consistent and predictable, right? There was nothing about his game that you didn't know when he was on the field. You know, he wasn't going to be at 9 or 10, but he was going to be the same thing every single time, which makes the game predictable if you're a center back. Charlie
100%. Well, no, but it's the same example that he gave about Olivier Giroud in France. Okay, Giroud didn't score any goals, but he was the guy that did the same things consistently, and the players knew how to play off of him. If you brought in a Benzema, if you brought in a Lacazette, maybe there's a little bit more unpredictability in their game, which could give you some benefits in other ways, but maybe takes away from the other players that are running off of them, the Mbappes and the Griezmanns and the Dembeles of the world. So there is something to be said that when you stick with somebody, it helps the team to stay with that. And if you change that, it does throw off the rhythm. And there's a lot of argument. I mean, Brett said it before, Valentina said it before, finding someone and sticking with that person. It just might be a little bit too early when we have so much time to still cast that net to see who's playing well at the right time. And then we can kind of lean into who that's going to be. The shitty part is we only have 10 days. We might get some behind the scenes friendlies, prior to the World Cup. But outside of that, it's weird that we wouldn't get a game or two in together as a group to really sort that out. And now I remember having a behind the scenes friendly. I forgot who we played when we were in Germany because we were the last match day of the tournament in the group stages. So we had to wait 5 or 6 days before it was our turn. So we got the game. I forgot who we played. It was one of the African nations, but that was there. And we were going to cross over with them. But it was a good game for us because we got a little bit of that getting sharp and kind of getting into that mindset and also building those important relationships in high pressure situations when the game moves so fast. So that's an interesting point that you bring up, and obviously one that we'll continue to talk about because we have plenty of episodes to go from here till then. Now, Charlie, let's go back to the teams. We talked about Wales a little bit, but Scotland and Ukraine obviously have a chance to be the team that we're facing as well. And I just want to remind everybody that Ukraine, despite all of their other stuff, and if they can get their team together and motivated, they are going to be playing with this otherworldly purpose to try to do it for their country. So that is something to take into consideration.
Do you think time could change that too, though? Like
potentially.
Or do you think Ukraine's still the team of the tournament in 7 months from now?
That's a good question. But with Ukraine, when I look at their qualifying, they were in with France, Finland, Bosnia, and Kazakhstan. And they didn't lose any games. They didn't lose any games in that group. Now, they had only 2 wins. They had 6 draws, but they didn't lose to France over 2 legs, which I thought is pretty impressive. So there's something about this Ukrainian team prior to this situation going on off the field that led them to having some character to their team. And then in Group F, that was Denmark, Scotland, Israel, Austria, Faroe Islands, and Moldova. And Scotland got second there, 4 points behind Denmark. They only lost once in 10 group stage games or qualifying games. And that's pretty impressive as well. So you got teams that are going and trending in the right direction. Are you, I don't say afraid or scared because I already know what you're going to say to that, but do they give you any concern, either one of those 2 teams, or does Wales give you the most concern? Or what do you like about Scotland and Ukraine, and why don't we want to face them?
I honestly think there's not a team we don't want to face. It's almost like if it's Wales, great, it's Wales. If it's Scotland, great, it's Scotland. If it's Ukraine, man, they're going to be playing with a lot of emotion. But whoever it is, the U.S. should be able, when they're playing at their best, to beat these teams. So, I think when you look at the squads, there's not a player that jumps out to you other than Gareth Bale, who's kind of gone in and out because he's not playing with Real Madrid really, that you're thinking about, man, we got to change or adapt our game plan because of that one player. Now, if you play against England, you play against Belgium, you play against France, they have those individual brilliant players that don't come around too often, that you completely have to change. You have to change the way you play when you're playing against Mbappe and Dembele at the same time. You have to. Belgium, you have to change the way you play when you have Kevin De Bruyne on the field. But for Wales and Scotland and Ukraine, you don't. You just have to be tactically sound.
That's a good point.
You have to finish your chances. And I think for the U.S., Scotland and Wales both play with a 3-back system. That plays, I think, to an advantage with the way we play. So from that standpoint, it really comes down to team selection and confidence and form.
Okay. Heath, any thoughts on these other two countries? We gave Wales some love. How about little Scotland, Ukraine love?
Yeah, I mean, I think Charlie actually pointed this out really well of, the matchup is going to come down to moments. It's going to come down to competing and things like that, where we're not outmatched. Again, I think we have weaknesses that teams can play to and poke at, but we will also look at Wales and we'll look at Scotland and Ukraine through the same lens of they've got some weaknesses that we can poke at in terms of like, who's their goal scorer, who's going to be Wales go to number 9 traditionally, or Scotland's number 9 traditionally, or Ukraine's number 9 kind of a traditional number 9. So I think Charlie's point is spot on in the fact that like there is not an X factor. There is potential X factors. There are guys you have to adjust to if they're having their day, but you would say the same about Christian Pulisic. If he's having his day, he can take over a game,
right?
Right. Things like that. So again, in terms of competing, making it really hard for the way the U.S. plays, like I don't love Scotland or Wales in those ones because I think they match up just, again, a little more of a traditional football match, right? And I think Ukraine will have a little bit more technical ability along with the fight that they have as a national team that changes things a little bit. But I wouldn't say that any of them are ones you want to avoid. It's just about, and then going down into the tactics of the game plan and that sort of stuff. We've all three of us have played in those, maybe not, Jimmy's only one in a World Cup game, but in games of consequence or in important games where there are certain players you look out for, but when you're playing a Spain or a France or an Italy or somebody where you go, okay, this is going to be a little bit more of like, our tactics got to be really good and our tactics are reactive to them versus us being a little bit more of a two-way sort of like setup where it's like make them change and they're trying to make us make adjustments to them.
Yeah, Ukraine actually plays with the back 3. So does Scotland and so does Wales. Now we saw though with Wales when they're playing against an opponent where I think they're kind of raising the white flag and going, all right, you might be a little bit better. They'll drop into a back 5. But it's interesting because to your point, Charlie, it is ultimately. But I do appreciate your thought there, Charlie, that we could have a lot of success against a back 3. It might limit our outside backs from Serginho Dest and Anthony Robinson maybe having as much influence, but I think our wingers could have a lot of success. And Ukraine with that back 3 ended up getting to the quarterfinals of the Euros, losing to England 4-0. So they're probably pulling for Ukraine to get through so they have some good history against them. Scotland and Steve Clark, I think, well organized, and they're going to be tough to break down. But again, these are teams that I think we should be trying to get after, and we should try to be playing the front foot. And to your point, Heath, the whole proactive versus reactive. I hope that we're more in the proactive camp and putting ourselves in positions to be or have good reactions. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm excited to see how these games play out. They're going to be happening here very soon. Just to remind everybody, June 1st will be Scotland versus Ukraine, and the winner of that will play against Wales in Wales on June 5th. So obviously all eyes will be on that. We'll make sure you guys are prepped for those games as they approach. But we're going to take our first break, everybody. So after you hit like and subscribe and turn on your notifications, and of course, subscribe on any podcast platform that you listen to, we're going to get into the Concacaf Champions League and the big finals coming up with the Seattle Sounders taking on Pumas. And we're going to do it right after this.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?
I am honored to be here.
My appointment is a 4-year
sentence
term.
They want to turn me into a Black Martha Stewart?
You kept your political dreams a secret from me.
I'm your wife, not one of your girlfriends.
I'll choose my causes. Understood?
Madam First Lady.
Welcome back, everyone, to the In Soccer We Trust podcast. I'm Jimmy Conrad alongside Charlie Davies and Heath Pearce. And now after breaking down the Wales stuff, we're going to get into the Concacaf Champions League. But before I do that, I have to say, please listen to the Attacking Third podcast, one of the podcast family here with CBS Sports. They're covering everything to do with women's soccer, especially as it pertains to what's happening with the U.S. Women's National Team and NWSL. And Friday night, following the last NWSL game, they're going to have a live recap. So tune in for that. Make sure you subscribe and like anything that they're doing. They're having a lot of fun over there. Monday morning, they'll have a full NWSL recap, which I appreciate. The time to be determined on that. And then Monday at 3 p.m., They're going to have a very special U.S. Women's National Team hour to break everything that's going on with the U.S. Women's National Team. And shout out to Sophia Smith for getting her first hat trick recently against Uzbekistan, and for Kat Macario for being an absolute beast. I mean, what a player. We have some amazing players, amazing players with the women's national team, and the future is very bright. Now, speaking of bright futures, Charlie, I'm coming to you first. Seattle Sounders taking care of NYCFC last night in the second leg of the semifinals. What I really loved about that game last night, for everybody that didn't see it, Stefan Fry is the goalkeeper for the Sounders, made tremendous saves. He's 35 years old, but he got naturalized as a U.S. citizen when he was 31. I still wonder why we never really called him in and gave him a chance. That's one thing for you. He's excellent goalkeeper. Second is I love the urgency that I saw last night between two MLS teams, because maybe there was something at stake. It wasn't a normal game where if it ended in a draw, everybody's like, all right, we'll just take the 1 point and get on with it. There had to be a winner, and it felt like the stakes were on it. And I wish we could replicate that more. Now everybody's going to be like, oh, it's promotion relegation. I don't think it's just that simple. It's always just promotion relegation. I see a lot of dull affairs all over the world that have promotion relegation. You're like, oh my God, I want all 90 minutes of my life back. This game just had that urgency. And maybe it's just because it's a knockout round competition, but I would love to see more of that from MLS teams, because when we play with that type of initiative, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. It's ambition, expectations. The league has grown considerably where it's not just good enough anymore. You have to go and win trophies. And Concacaf Champions League is the one trophy that has escaped MLS since the start. So now that teams are building their rosters, and I think they're in a much more competitive way. You look at what Seattle Sounders have done. I mean, Gareth Largaway has really pushed every button, right? And I think he's done a terrific job of making sure that this group of players was going to be locked in and committed to the culture. And then you look at what Smetzer has done, and I think Smetzer is one of those guys who keeps this momentum going and gets guys bought in. And a lot of I think people don't give him enough credit. They don't give him enough credit. And it's hard to be a manager of a professional team and to have success year after year after year. And he's doing it. And he's doing it because he knows how to manage this group of players. So when I look at the Seattle Sounders, they're set throughout the whole squad. I mean, they have depth. The spine of the team is strong. And when you have Rui Diaz leading the line, who can score on half chances, we don't have a striker in the U.S. men's national team pool like him, who can score at any moment. And he's just an assassin in the box. Man, it's a special quality to have. And when you have that type of striker, typically that means you're going to have success.
Okay, I'm going to throw a stat at you, and I appreciate that insight, Charlie. Heath, I'm coming to you with this. The Sounders have now reached a final in 6 of the 7 seasons under Brian Schmetzer. They have 4 MLS Cup appearances, 1 Leagues Cup appearance, and now 1 CONCACAF Champions League. I feel like we got a proper dynasty on our hands here with the Sounders. So shout out to Schmetzer and Garth Lagerwey for putting together a team that has a nice mix of young, old veterans, both from MLS and from across the world, that know how to win games. I mean, can you talk about the Sounders? And because that consistency isn't a mistake.
It's not. And when you look at the way they built the team, like a year like last year, right, where they fall short of what you expect the Sounders to do. Sounders sometimes sneak into the playoffs, not in the greatest of form, and they know exactly what to do, right? They're willing to play ugly. They're willing to scrap. They just have this maturity of knowing the moments of a game and when they're leaning their way in to capitalize and when to be able to close out games. You go back a couple years to LAFC, who were by far the best team in the league, and Seattle Sounders just said, no, thank you. You guys are out. You don't, playoffs are different than the regular season. And they continue to just add little pieces, but they've kept the core of their team together. And I think it is a dynasty because of the fact that you would expect after a year like last year, which doesn't live up to the standards of years past, you go, oh, maybe they'll tear the team apart. Maybe it's time for some fresh blood, like you would say, or new players to come in, or an influx of maybe players need new changes or challenges. Let's get rid of some of our core members. And they haven't done that. And then they come back into a situation like that. And you look at them, and I still constantly think that you put the Seattle Sounders against anybody in games of consequence, and I'm going to go with the Seattle Sounders just because They've been there before. They have the experience. They have game changers. They don't seem to ever be really shook by moments. And as Charlie mentioned, depth. They've got so much depth for an MLS side that I know we said this about Montreal. I know we said this about Real Salt Lake. I know we said this about what are some of our other teams that we've had in finals? I guess
Toronto?
it was, yeah. No, it's
close.
Yeah, I think there was who are the other Champions League finalists? The Galaxy?
Drawing a blank.
But either way, like
LAFC. You say them already?
Yeah, I didn't say them. No, LAFC. And you look at the Seattle Sounders, and I just go, they're still more well equipped to deal with the stress of big games for some reason, and it's a mix of, again, experience. It's a mix of the mentality from Brian Schmetzer. It's a mix of the club's identity, the identity of the city. It's just got all these pieces that make them a contender always. And I actually really like their chances against a Puma side who aren't one of the elite clubs in Mexico traditionally. They're not one of the big 3 or 4. They're not one of the dynasties of Mexico. Yes, they've got, I don't know, 7 or 8 or whatever league titles, but they're not huge. And they obviously are on a Cinderella run, I guess, after the, coming through Saprissa, I think it was Saprissa, or was it LDA? Was it Saprissa?
No, it was Saprissa. They
and then
2 in leg 1, and then they won.
The huge comeback
like
a huge comeback against the Revs. Like, they're on the Cinderella run, which is an incredible thing. But like, punch for punch and pound for pound, I like the Sounders in this final. And when I go back to the matchups, and I know it's recency bias, I still think this is our best chance ever, considering the opponent and the team that we have on the field. I say we as a league. I should be wearing an MLS hat right now. Actually, I'm wearing an NYCFC hat after Charlie believed that they would beat the Sounders and said that
yeah, all right,
the MLS champions. He said kept talking about the champions.
So Chuck, let's talk about it being a 2-legged final, which I kind of like. All things considered, we get a little bit of Mexican culture and flair and passion, and it's not just in like a one-off at a neutral site. And then they get back to Seattle, where Pumas have been okay away from home. They lost that snow game against the Revs 3-0. But outside of that, didn't lose any games away from home, including a big 0-0 draw in the last second leg of the semifinals against Cruz Azul, who are very good.
Mm-hmm.
Pumas, though, pretty good at home. 4-1 over Saprissa. They did that 3-0 over the Revs, beat Cruz Azul 2-1. They were up 2-0 until they gave up a late goal in that one. And somebody said it, Andy said that the first leg is going to be super important. It's in Mexico. That game is April 27th on Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. And then the following leg 2 will be on May 4th in Seattle. Do you feel like Seattle had a better chance, or Pumas, over 90 minutes? Or who do you think has the advantage, since it's a 2-legged affair?
The fact that the Seattle Sounders have the second leg at home is a huge advantage. I've always loved playing the first leg on the road, because the pressure's on them not to give up the away goal.
Right.
And they might be over aggressive at times. And for Seattle, they've already played on the road in León, and they got a draw. So it's not like it's foreign to them. They understand the task at hand, how you get a point on the road in Mexico. It's a very difficult place to play. So for me, watching Pumas play in the 2 legs versus Cruz Azul and the New England Revolution, this is a team that's vulnerable. They're very vulnerable. I mean, they are almost one-dimensional in the way they attack. And I think the Seattle Sounders, they can be on the front foot. They can be ultra aggressive. They can keep possession, but they also can defend very well and counter. And if you look at the players that they have, you look on the right side of Pumas, the right back, he gets up quite often. I mean, it's almost, Mozo gets up, he bombs forward, and you're playing on the side of Jordan Morris. That screams counterattack. That screams opportunity for the Seattle Sounders. You have Ladero, who can play in any scenario, is a class player. João Paulo has turned into one of the premier 6s in Major League Soccer. He's playing next to Albert Rusnak, who's typically a 10, but he's kind of fitting right in as a kind of an 8 in this system. And then you have Christian Roldan, who can play all up down the right side, who can come inside. He's a flexible. He's a utility player. He's probably one of the best utility players I've ever seen. And his brother at right back, Alex Roldan, who's starting Concacaf World Cup qualifying for El Salvador. They have Stefan Fry, who comes up with big save after big save. And then you can't forget about Raul Ruidiaz. Who's another player who's kind of unpredictable, but can at times, I think he's matured in the attacking third with his, whether it's the pass selection or the delivery. So for me, the Sounders have a huge advantage, and this first leg will
just
dictate
keep it
a
close.
lot.
Just got to keep it close.
Just keep it close.
Now,
by the way, Jimmy, on that, what again, when you think back to LAFC, they had the best team stylistically to compete in CONCACAF Champions League. Just the way that they played matched up well with the Liga MX teams. And if you remember, they took down, I think, 3 of them on the way to the final. But you still had to get past Tigres in the final. And even though they were up, like, that is a really, like, that matchup against Tigres is a toss-up, right? 2 legs for Seattle Sounders and the experience that they have in this team. You can play that a little bit differently. And it's just a different type of matchup versus Pumas that I would have traditionally have thought, like, yeah, I want LAFC because their style of play matches up well to win that. But and maybe against the Pumas it would, but again, they ultimately fell short because eventually you have to take down the giant who was waiting for you in the final. This year is not the case with Pumas. This is just a team that's really in good form in Champions League, not in great form in the league, and the Seattle Sounders are a fantastic team.
Yeah, they are currently in 10th, Pumas in Liga MX. The last 9 games in all competitions away from home, they've only won 1. And I think that bodes really well. And I think you're right, Charlie, that having the second leg in Seattle puts a lot more pressure on Pumas to have to get something, to have to chase it a little bit more in leg 1, given how bad their recent away form is. And probably the sting of going down to New England and getting slapped around 3-0 in that game too probably didn't feel very good, even though they did redeem themselves in leg 2. And they won't have that opportunity this time around. When I look at Seattle's team and look at the spine of their team, and they have a goalkeeper that is incredible at making timely saves, and they have the quality that they do. And if Jordan Morris continues to play with the confidence that he has been lately, along with all the other players that we mentioned, and you got Joe Paulo in the spine. I mean, there's not really any weaknesses in their team. And I think that really speaks to what they built in Seattle under Schmetzer and Garth Lagerwey and getting the most out of these guys. And you can sense too that they also hold each other accountable. It's not like Schmetzer has to do too much in-game management of holding the players, hold themselves accountable. They have like leaders in every line of the field, multiple leaders in every line of the field. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Charlie, I'll come to you on this. I actually have expectations for the first time in a long time that we should beat Pumas and we should win the CONCACAF Champions League. Whereas before I was always kind of hopeful. Now I'm expecting it. And I think that's a different mindset, but Pumas aren't going to lay down. So do you feel the same way as me?
I do. And like you said, Heath, if you're playing in the final and it's Tigres, Club America, Monterrey, big name clubs who have these special players in Liga MX, they've paid a lot of money. And ultimately, it's one of those games where you have to adjust to them. And you're going to concede possession to them. This Pumas team, they're all about heart. It's work rate. It's a team. They thrive off of transition. They thrive off of their outside backs overlapping and whipping balls in for their striker. I think for me, Dineno is a striker who likes to make runs in the box. He gets in between the center backs. But Arriaga, he's capable to defend that. I mean, he's played in World Cup qualifying. He understands how to defend internationally, which I think bodes well for them in this matchup. Pumas gave up a number of chances early on to the Revs team when they won 3-0 at home to win in penalties. Adam Buxa just wasn't up for the challenge. He didn't finish. I think the pressure he's putting on himself to make the Poland World Cup team is a little harsh. I think it's taken away from his game as of late, because it's hard not to think about playing on the same team with Lewandowski and playing with him. And so Rui Diaz is another animal. And I think that's the X factor for this team that all the other opponents that had played Pumas didn't necessarily have. Rui Diaz is a beast in front of goal. And with him healthy, Jordan Morris healthy, and Ladero healthy, that's enough to beat this Pumas team home or away.
Heath, what do you say? Your expectations? You got Seattle all the way, like no question. Any hesitation?
I mean, of course there's hesitation, just because I expect Seattle generally to run through everyone, and we've seen them not at times. So they're definitely capable of losing. It's a final, but over 2 legs. If this was 1 leg, then it's a crapshoot. It's a final. It depends on the pressure. If you remember when Portland Timbers made it all the way to the final to play Atlanta at home, when you're like, oh yeah, they're on this dream run. They snuck into the playoffs. They're so great. And then just got absolutely battered in one game at a final in Atlanta. that's what can happen, right? And there's a lot of nerves that go into that, and there's a lot of pressure on these guys to create the dynasty. They've lived up to that pressure more often than not, which is why I like their chance, especially over 2 legs, because the second leg will dictate exactly where they need to be. They're at home, as Charlie mentioned. It's a huge advantage for a team that doesn't play well away from home. That I'm all in on putting on my MLS hat once we win this thing.
The one thing I want to add to this is I hope at least we don't like have to get lucky to win this. Like, I don't want to hear any bitching. Oh, it's only because of the referee or because somebody slipped, or, I want us to win comprehensively. I want the Sounders to just kick their ass, and that there's no doubt as to who needed and who deserved to win, so they can book their ticket to the FIFA Club World Cup, which will be such an incredible experience for the Sounders that if that happens, I'll be jealous, because that would be such an incredible opportunity for an MLS team to have that. Now, the Galaxy, to give everybody a little bit of context, the Galaxy won the Concacaf Champions Cup back in 2000, and that year the FIFA Club World Cup wasn't as organized and put together as it is now. And it was kind of like thrown together, and then it was between 2 Brazilian teams in the final, and somebody from Brazil won. I think it was Corinthians or somebody. But now we actually have it. Now that it's been solidified and the organization is there and the infrastructure is there, it's going to be thrilling for us to and I say us because I'm still in MLS hat mode too, where I really just want to see an MLS team compete against some of the biggest clubs in the world in a meaningful competition. I'm tired of the summer friendlies where people have baked in excuses. Well, our guys are coming off of summer and, they're like 5 pounds overweight and it's preseason and all that crap when we beat them. And I want to beat them fair and square. So I hope that we get that opportunity. Final thoughts, guys. I could go on forever on these types of topics and obviously help support any North American clubs in their quest to dominate at FIFA Club World Cup. Heath, I'm going to come to you first. Final thoughts before we get into tomorrow's show. By the way, another In Soccer We Trust is happening at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's 10 a.m. Pacific. Circle that on your calendar. Turn on your notifications as you do. Go ahead, Heath.
My whole thing is like, had Charlie played out his career as we had all hoped, at what age he would have started getting that little striker's belly coming in for preseason, Like, how old would you have been, Charlie? Just
I'm 35 now, and I don't have that belly.
Yeah, but you would have had these goals, maybe a little more. We'd have felt a little more privileged coming back. Eating a little better. Maybe it's telling people that you're just wearing a size smaller shirt. I just would have loved to seen Charlie with just a little bit of that belly kind of rounding out his final years. That's just
not going to happen.
I'm going to see if I can get somebody to edit that, just like maybe a little an R9 body,
Well, he'll always have the quads, so don't worry, Charlie. He always have the.
But that's what I mean. Like Charlie's build. Could you imagine Charlie's build with just like a little, like not a big belly, but like a little belly? I would love
like
that,
a little
man.
pot belly.
Yeah, with your build, it would just be the most fantastic thing. You boxing people into, you be backing people into the box.
That's like Charlie in the over 50 league at some point. That's what it's gonna look like. No, Charlie, final thoughts.
Man, we have a good group, and of course we're not the Giants that.
I thought you meant this podcast, man. I was going to be so excited,
Well, that too. I am pumped about this group. But I'm saying in terms of the World Cup group, we've talked about who are we playing: Wales, Ukraine, Scotland, Iran. At the end of the day, we have to perform. And we know nothing's a given. It's a World Cup. Iran could get out of the group. Ukraine could win 2 games and they're in the group and all of a sudden they're flying. World Cups are unpredictable. That's why they're amazing, because England, they could be the favorites and they could not go through possibly. Who knows? But if you're looking just on paper, it's a favorable group out of the groups we could have possibly had. And we have to figure out who the 9 is. I think that's the biggest concern for me heading into this World Cup, because outside backs, not an issue. Center backs, not an issue. There still could probably be 1 or 2 that emerge in the next 6 months just from consistent playing time and form, but still not an issue. Goalkeeper, not an issue. I mean, whether Stefan and Turner are playing or not, they're still elite keepers. So I'm not worried about that. Midfield, not a worry. Wingers, not a worry. The striker position, that is the one area where we don't have many answers. We have, possibilities.
Right.
But no one is a definite. And that's just a little concerning for me.
Jeez, final thoughts on a down.
Final
Charlie
thoughts,
hates the national team. Jeez, dude. You know
Jeez.
Just let him have his final thought. Listen, I'll bring the energy back up. Now, for the first time since 1994, the World Cup is back in North America in 2026. 16 cities, 11 in the U.S., 3 in Mexico, and 2 in Canada will be holding matches during the 2026 World Cup, as I mentioned. And we're going to talk about that all tomorrow on In Soccer We Trust. So make sure you come back and join us. We'll go live 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Or if you want to catch it later on the replay, then make sure you get it on the podcast or subscribe to the channel. You can catch it anytime. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your support. So on behalf of producer Alex, Charlie Davies, Heath Pearce, I'm Jimmy Conrad, saying we salute you for listening to In Soccer We Trust, and we'll see